Anthony Blinken is in Israel. He's discussing Hamas's proposed truce plan as a fierce statement has surfaced from Saudi Arabia. A Saudi statement rejected U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby's suggestion that Riyadh is prepared to normalize ties with Israel. Saudi Arabia said there will be no diplomatic ties with Israel without an independent Palestinian state. Even after the October 7th attacks, Saudi Arabia had acknowledged its willingness to normalize relations with Israel. But now they are emphasizing that relations with Israel will be possible only after a ceasefire in Gaza, and that must include the framework to create a Palestinian state. Blinken is set to wind up his fifth Mideast trip since October 7th attacks on Israel. Earlier, he had visited Saudi Arabia before making stops in Egypt and Qatar. In Doha, Blinken expressed confidence that an agreement is possible. He nonetheless added that there is still a lot of work to do. The Hamas militant group has proposed a truce in 3 phases during which they would free the remaining hostages they hold. Further phase would include handing over soldiers and bodies of hostages in exchange for release of Palestinian prisoners in Israel. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has insisted that Israel will not end its Gaza campaign till Hamas is wiped out. Okay, well, for more on this, we are being joined by Edward P. Joseph, Senior Fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, and he's also a foreign policy analyst, joining me live from Washington, D.C. Edward, great to see you again, and thank you for joining us this morning. Do you think there is peace on the horizon, or will Israel continue its campaign to wipe out Hamas as it has promised?
That's one thing that we do appear to be plausible, is that the intense negotiations that we saw recently in Paris, the United States, Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, that appears to be plausible because, as your report indicated, there's now a response from Hamas to the offer. And we have to remember that there was been a long-standing concept here that Israel had agreed to, which is a prolonged ceasefire in exchange for release of the hostages and some number of release of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. So that construct appears to be possible. Whether there is a wider possibility for some peace, that remains more uncertain. But the story about some type of Saudi anger and fuming about the United States appears to be somewhat blown out of proportion. Please.
So Anthony Blinken right now, as we're speaking, is meeting Israeli President Herzog. Given a sense of the situation the U.S. finds itself in, as Anthony Blinken makes this 5th visit to the region, this balancing act that the United States is trying to play, how is that working out?
In fact, remarkably well, because we should put this all into some historical context. What you could be seeing here is Secretary Blinken being refused to even come to these various countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or Egypt. Instead, he is able, as the Secretary of State, to speak to the highest levels of government, the Emir of Qatar, Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, President of Egypt. All have seen him. And these have not been this, what we once saw, some type of tongue lashing and criticism. These are serious negotiations. That's the way they're portrayed. They're portrayed even domestically as these are mutually respectful encounters. That's the way that these are portrayed. And put this into historical context. What could we be seeing? We could be seeing some type of hostility on the order of what happened in 1973 with the Arab boycott of Israel and the oil embargo, where Arab countries in furor at Israel banded together and imposed an oil embargo on all countries, including the United States, that supported Israel. We see nothing of the kind. We see genuine efforts working, addressing U.S. and Israeli concerns about the release of the hostages. No one dismisses that in any of these capitals, in Doha, in Riyadh, or Cairo. No one says, just stop the fighting, ceasefire now, as so many protesters demand. That's not the position of these governments. They're taking the Israeli concerns, the American concerns seriously. The U.S. in turn is taking the concerns of the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the Saudis seriously as well. So it's very difficult. It's not easy. We have to remember that Hamas does not abide by any of the standards, international law, or any political pressures. It's a renegade organization that clearly doesn't care about the welfare of its own people in Gaza. But nonetheless, these diplomatic efforts are moving forward, as difficult as they are. Please.
Well, thank you so much for that elaborate analysis. Edward P. Joseph joining us live from Washington, D.C. on this very critical topic that we'll be following very closely. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thanks, Edward.
Thank you.